Hi, I'm Antonia. This is Universally Me. Please follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Antonia Carlotta, and check out my newly revamped Patreon with all new levels and benefits at patreon.com/Antonia Carlotta. It's crazy to think that I'm about 70 videos in on my channel. And even though I've covered some incredible people and places and things, there are still a lot of really important topics that I've barely talked about yet. It was probably 50 videos before I got to Carl Laemmle Jr., maybe 60 before Lois Weber, and then 65 before James Whale. And now I am finally getting to the immortal, the incomparable Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi is often remembered for his horror films, and especially Dracula. But his career really spanned more than 50 years and many mediums and genres. For those of you who have been watching my channel for a while, you might remember that a couple years ago I did a video about Bela's homes around LA. His career had some highs and lows, and it was really interesting that his houses followed that pattern. For those of you who haven't seen it, or just if it's been a while, I recommend watching that after this, because it really helps to provide more context into his life. Bela Lugosi was born Bela Ferenc Dejeu Blasco on October 20th, 1882. He chose his stage name Lugosi to honor his hometown of Lugos in Hungary, though that town is now part of Romania. Bela was the youngest of 4 children, and he actually dropped out of school at the age of 12, which I read had to do with him not doing so well with authority. He left his family and worked various jobs, including as a miner and for a railroad, before discovering theater around 1902. Then he went on tour with some theater groups, performing in plays and operettas before he joined the National Theater Group of Hungary. And I was surprised to learn that Bela actually had a pretty solid reputation in Shakespearean roles. In 1914, when World War I started, Bela temporarily put his acting career on hold so he could fight with the Austro-Hungarian army. But by 1916, he left the service with an injury. And this injury would later come back to haunt him and play a part in his downfall. In 1917, he got married to Ilona Smic, and he started acting in Hungarian silent films under the name Aristide Olt. But after World War I, Hungary had problems of its own, and Bela, who participated in the revolution, was forced to flee the country. He continued acting across Europe and saw some success in Germany. He divorced his first wife and then moved to the United States, where he made his first appearance in a play called The Red Poppy. I found it incredible that Bela didn't even speak English yet when he booked the role, but he learned his part phonetically with a tutor and still managed to give an inspired performance. Bela married again, another woman named Ilona, but they divorced too. He continued acting in films and plays in New York until 1927, when he booked the role that he would be known for the rest of his life. Dracula. Bela starred in the play for 261 performances and got great critical acclaim. When the show went on tour, he went with it and continued all the way until the end of the West Coast run, when he stayed in California to continue his film career. He also got married for a 3rd time, this time to a San Francisco socialite named Beatrice Weeks, though they also divorced pretty soon after, and it seems this is partly because Bela had a not-so-great temper, but also because he was apparently having an affair with Clara Bow. For a few years, Bela alternated between Dracula the play and accepting bit parts in films. He just wasn't having the success that he had abroad. And even when it came to Dracula the movie, he wasn't Universal's first choice. Despite his success in the play, they were not that into him. In order to finally clinch the role, Bela had to accept just $500 a week. It paid off though, and when Dracula came out on Valentine's Day of 1931, it was a massive success, earning more than $700,000. And it's pretty amazing to think that the Dracula that Bela Lugosi played is what almost every vampire on film and TV has tried to emulate since, down to the voice and the slow cadence, the accent, and even his look.
I am Dracula.
The downside of being so definitively Dracula is that Bela got really pigeonholed after. With his look and his accent, the only parts that he could really book were horror villains. And he was really vocal about wanting to get out of the horror genre, but no one really gave him a chance beyond bit parts here and there. And after my uncle Carl Laemmle and Jr. left Universal, it only got worse. The Hays Code, which censored films, started being more seriously enforced, and Universal didn't even make a horror film for about 3 years. Bela got stuck doing B-movies, and he wasn't picky. It seems he accepted most roles just to keep working. Bela Lugosi was actually offered the role of Frankenstein after Dracula, but he turned it down because he didn't like the idea of playing a monster where his face was covered and he didn't have any lines. But I have to wonder if he stopped rejecting roles after because maybe he was afraid of making the same mistake again. But then I also find myself wondering if he had played Frankenstein, if that really would have changed the trajectory of his career. And that I don't know. In the late 1930s, Bela had a brief resurgence when a theater did a double feature of Dracula and Frankenstein, and audiences sold out to see the film, and other theaters started picking the movies up too. Universal saw the excitement for Bela, and they started casting him in movies again, including Son of Frankenstein, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Despite Bela's career boost in the 40s, his life was not so great. Back in 1933, he'd married Lillian Arch, and they had a son named Bela Lugosi Jr., whom Bela loved very much. But as I mentioned, his injuries from the war would come back to haunt him, and around the time his son was born, Bela started receiving morphine and methadone for his pain. He ended up very addicted to opiates all the way until 1955 when Lillian left him and he finally checked himself into rehab. His addiction was definitely a big factor as to why Bela was always hurting for money, even though he was pretty continuously acting in films and plays. In a 2008 interview, Bela's son, Bela Jr., commended his father for checking himself into rehab and for finally taking back control of his life. In 1955, Bela got married one final time to a fan named Hope Leininger, but they were only married for 1 year before Bela suffered a heart attack while filming Plan 9 from Outer Space with Ed Wood. At the age of 73, he passed away, and he was buried in his Dracula costume and cape, which was the decision of his son and his ex-wife Lillian. I liked learning from Bela Lugosi Jr. that his dad stayed close to his roots and the Hungarian community in Los Angeles through most of his life. It reminded me a lot of my Uncle Carl and his connection to Germany. I also really appreciated how meticulous Bela was in his acting, especially in the early days before he even really spoke English. And of course, his career wasn't linear. It was full of ups and downs, but it all weaves together this really beautiful story. And the legacy that he leaves behind is something else. I mean, to this day, if you go anywhere in the world and ask somebody to describe a vampire, they will likely describe Bela Lugosi to you. I still have so many Bela Lugosi movies to see, so let me know what some of your favorites are so I know where to start. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Antonia Carlotta. And check out my newly revamped Patreon, patreon.com/Antonia Carlotta. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.